Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, and I actually had the wrong StreamYard link. So our wonderful guest Jennifer Haupt was here on time, and I was not. Sorry, sorry, sorry. So let's get started. A few housekeeping things. Please put all your questions and comments right in the comments. You can see it on the right-hand side. There's also a chat button, I believe, and you can put your comments in there. Please buy Jennifer Holt's wonderful novel, Come As You Are, at your favorite indie bookstore. Of course, you can buy it anywhere where books are sold, but we really prefer that you support the indies. We would be delighted if you could do that. So let me just give an introduction and we will start talking. Jennifer Haupt is the author of In the Shadow of 10,000 Hills and the absolutely groundbreaking anthology Alone Together: Love, Grief, and Comfort in the Time of COVID-19, which won the 2021 Washington State Book Award for general nonfiction. It also raised more than $40,000 for the Book Industry Charitable Foundation. She runs a popular Psychology Today blog, One True Thing, and her work has appeared in the Oprah Magazine, The Rumpus, and more. She's also a really wonderful friend of mine, and I'm just so delighted to have her here. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you so much for talking with me, Caroline. It's just a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have
So long. Hi.
It's a pleasure to have you here, and I have all sorts of questions that are different from the ones that I asked you last night. And also, viewers can, if you want, you can go see. Um, I think there's going to be a recording of that, so you can watch it again. So I want to first talk about the title. I love the titles are really hard, at least for me. I love the title "Come As You Are" because it implies, come as you are, or don't worry about who you were or who you will be. And it has so much to do with the book and with the main characters, Zane and Sky. So, can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the title, Come As You Are, implies that all this acceptance and so forth. But the song itself is really full of contradictions. And Kurt Cobain has said it's about people and the way that they're expected to act and how they act differently. And it's all about, for me, it's about the memory of who you have as of yourself and of other people that sometimes colors the present. So it's really about the person you remember yourself and to be, and reconciling that person with who you are now.
It's a very kind of hopeful phrase. And I also wanted to ask you because your other book also had a wonderful, actually, all your books have had wonderful titles. Are titling books hard for you? Because people might not realize that titles are actually marketing choices.
Yeah, and I'm really lucky because I'm with a small indie publisher and I get to choose my own titles, and she works with me on the titles. And the title for my first novel, In the Shadow of 10,000 Hills, that novel had like 6 different titles before that one. And that one,
What were they? Do you remember what they were?
so the first one was that I really thought it was going to be was The Dreamcatcher's Daughter. And
That's
then
good.
my publisher said, well, she hates stories that have titles that have daughter in it because it implies that they belong to someone else. They're not their own person.
Oh,
And
that's interesting. That's right. That's interesting.
and then Dreamcatcher, there's a Dreamcatcher that plays predominantly in the story, but it implies also that it's maybe a story about indigenous people, or and In the Shadow of 10,000 Hills, 10,000 Hills is like what Rwanda's called, the land of 10,000 hills. So there's that one. And then my next book, I think, is going to be called, well, I actually can't say, but has been through a bunch of titles too. You, I'm curious about that for you.
It's terrible. It's really, really hard for me to do titles. Algonquin is very particular about them, and I, of course, can title my own book, and I can approve or disapprove whatever they come up with. But for some books, I came up with 80 titles, and they didn't like any of them. And I finally said to my editor, "You know what? Please, you come up with the title, and whatever you decide, it'll be fine by me." So I'm not married. I'm not married to any title I have. I just figure that as long as it's not something terrible, then, then I'm fine. So that moves on to the second part of this, which is covers. Covers too are very much a marketing decision, and they always supply you. I know I always get like 5 different choices, and they always ask me what I would like, and I never know. I never know. So tell us about your experience with the covers and how the cover of Come As You Are came about and just your
Well,
feelings.
again, I think working with a small publisher, I've been really lucky because she definitely we work together. And so my cover for this one, at first I thought was going to be a broken record, like a shattered record. Against a backdrop of different colors. And then when we saw it, it just didn't look right at all. And Michelle, my publisher, actually came up with this idea of having the cover be like the leg of a like denim leg, a man's leg, and it's all like distressed jeans, like like from the grunge era, and it looks very sort of dark and mysterious because there is a mystery in the story. It's a love story, but it's against the backdrop of a pretty dark mystery of someone who both Zane and Sky loved, who died in an accident that they both felt was their fault.
It's a great cover. It's an arresting cover. And it's always interesting to go into a bookstore and see the covers that call out to you. I think they did some scientific research where they found that red was a really good cover for sci-fi for some reason, but
Yeah.
who knows? I want to talk about the music because obviously music is really important to you, and it's really important through it. It sort of weaves melodically through your novel in a really wonderful way. And I wonder if you can talk about like the soundtrack of your particular life and how music has inspired you or helped you or driven you crazy or any number of things.
Well, so I'll give for an example. This morning, I woke up, I was in a really crappy mood because our internet has been out, and I hope it doesn't go out now. And so, during my launch week, that's not like a hugely great thing. And so I was like, okay, what song can I put on to just really get in a good mood for this? And so I put on Karma Police by Radiohead and Alive by Pearl Jam, and some Chris Cornell. And different songs just speak to me at different times. And like sometimes I really want to listen to just really fun music like Cyndi Lauper and the Backstreet Boys and just totally like age inappropriate stuff. Like I love indie music, just kind of obscure bands. So it really just all day long I'm listening to music.
Do you ever find that you will hear a song that you just can't listen to anymore that you loved when you were young because of the memories attached to it?
Oh, definitely. But there's a song now that Dave Grohl put in my head. I heard him in an interview talking about this song by They Might Be Giants. It's called Birdhouse in Your Soul. And it's like, I was like, okay, Dave Grohl likes this, so I'll give it a try. So I listened to it, and this was 2 months ago, and it is still stuck in my head so much. Like I cannot listen to this song anymore because I listened to it like 6 times, but it just got stuck in my head. But there are definitely songs there's one by Don Henley. It's called It's All About Forgiveness, and it's called The Heart of the Matter, and it makes me just cry, and I just can't listen to it because it's all about like the whole issue of forgiveness and how it's sometimes not possible. And that's a big theme for me.
So if you needed to get into into the right mood to write about forgiveness, would you maybe listen to that song?
Yeah, I would. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've
I
got like, yeah.
I call them book songs, like there's certain pieces of music I'll never listen to because it's too painful. But if I have to write something painful, then I'll put the music on because it pushes me into that.
Yeah, one of the best pieces of writing advice I ever got was from Maria Semple, and she said, "You really know you're writing well if you feel like you're going to throw up." And
Oh, I love that. I love that. Oh my God, that's hilarious. And that is true. I would say that's true. I
writing
want
makes me nauseous.
to I want to talk a little bit more about the whole issue of music, and for Zayn, it's fame. It's fame. Zayn says music held the promise of being someone. And when I read that in the novel, I thought, oh my God, that's exactly what so many people think about fame. And it's not really what fame is at all. Um, I wanted to know, like, what are your feelings about fame, about, being in the limelight now and having people know you and know your work and, they know your work, which makes them think, oh, well, I know Jennifer. And that's not always the case. So can you talk about that for a while?
Yeah, fame is an interesting thing. For me, I've never really been into it because for me, I associate it with narcissism, just because of
Right.
things in people in my life. But like, I have a friend who feels like he will not be successful unless his music is on Broadway. And that is not going to happen. I mean, it's just not. He writes very experimental stuff and it's beautiful, wonderful stuff. And I feel really badly for people who feel that way because for me, I think publishing my first novel was a big lesson in that because I felt like really all these things were going to change that didn't. And so I had a lot of success with it, but I was still the same and my life was still the
Right.
same. And so that really helped me, I think, to be in a mindset of the success is in doing the work every day. And I really think that's true.
I think it's true too. There's this fabulous story that and Annie Lamont told me about a friend of hers who's like a really famous composer, and he won an Academy Award. And he got up there on stage and said, like, thank you, I'm so happy." And he really looked happy. And she called him later that night and said, "So now are you happy?" And he said, "Annie, it lasted 10 minutes. By the time I got home, I was depressed again because I felt like it doesn't mean anything." So it's kind of, it isn't. It's far better just to concentrate on the work and, the people you love and what you really want to do. So let's talk. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Say at the same time, I think it's really important to honor those moments when you get,
Right.
you
You do
know,
get it.
like when I got the Washington State Book Award, which I considered a huge honor. I remember I was going out to Whidbey Island and for the weekend, and I remember just running out on the beach and like for like 10 minutes going, "I won the Washington State Book Award! Yay, yay, yay!" And then it was like, okay, that's done. I
Yeah, you move on to the next thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's just, those moments, I mean, they're wonderful, and it's really important to honor them, but it's also important to know that, you know, it's just a thing. It's
Plus,
really
that was unexpected for you, wasn't it? Can you tell us all, like, how that book came about? Because it's a remarkable story. You never really thought of doing a book at first, let alone winning a prize for it, right?
Yeah, and it was really there was a couple of different layers to it. I mean, obviously building community during the pandemic was really important.
Uh-huh.
I was really pleased that you were one of the first people to contribute an essay to the anthology, and that helped in other people to do so. And of course helping booksellers and raising money for them. But then there was also I loved winning the Washington State Book Award because usually when you win an award, it's just you and you're like, well, I don't want to brag about this too much because, like, but this was an award really there were 21 authors in Washington State who contributed to the book. And so for the book award ceremony, I made a reel of about 20 of the authors reading parts from the book. Or excuse me, there were more like 30 authors. But And so at the book award, I felt like I was sharing it with other authors, which was really incredibly special to be able to do that.
It's a much better feeling than just being you alone thinking about fame, to sort of embrace the whole community, because what you give out always comes back to you. Let's talk about dreams, in particular giving up your dreams. In the book, Sky has all these dreams that she's going to be with Zane, or sometimes she dreams that she's going to marry Aaron one day. But to me, what was so fascinating was early on in the book, she's at first focusing on changing her life for her daughter, Montana, rather than for herself. And gradually, she slowly begins to think about changing things for herself. So I wanted to know, do you think that she felt that changing her daughter was changing herself, or do you think she just needed to delve more into that she was a person worthy of making changes for herself?
I love that question because our children are in some ways extensions of ourselves, and I do think that for Sky, she was always more concerned about her daughter. About she stayed in a bad relationship with Zane for a while because she was concerned about her daughter, and then she left that relationship for the same reason. And through her trajectory, her character arc really was about her trying to figure out what was best for her. And so yeah, I think that and part of that is
Yeah. I
dreams.
don't I don't wanna give anything away, but I have to say that the ending was perfection, just perfection. I mean, there were so many different ways as I was reading that I thought, "Oh, okay, I'm thinking that it's." I mean, I always do this as a writer, try to figure out the ending. I thought, "Okay, I think this might happen." And then I would read a little bit more and say, "Oh, no, this isn't going to happen at all." And then right at the end, you had an ending that was what all writers want, inevitable and yet so surprising and perfect. So that was great. Was that a hard time getting that to work out?
It was, and I mean, I don't want to, give anything away, but the ending was really different at first, and it took me about 7 years in before this ending came
I
about.
love it. I love it. That's the whole writing process. Sometimes that happens. A lot of the book too is about the silent pledges we make to one another, the things we agree not to talk about, which actually corrode inside of us. So, do you think in this novel that those pledges made your characters feel that they were in control? And for you personally, what do you think about? Do you think we ever are really in control of our lives, or what things can we control?
Yeah, the silent pledges is a real big one. I mean, in my family, I had a sister who died when I was very young, and
Oh, sorry.
we never talked about her, and there were no pictures of her, and it was just, I think at the time with my parents, there weren't really grief support groups, and that was just how you dealt with it. You just moved on. And it wasn't until my mom was probably close to 70 that she would talk about Susie. And and breaking that silent pledge really opened up our relationship, and made us very close, closer than ever. And so I think I thought a lot about that when I was writing this story. And Sky and Zane, this secret that binds them is about someone who died unexpectedly and they both feel responsible for. And coming to terms with that secret really was brought them closer together and enabled them to become better parents to their daughter, Montana.
I totally agree, and I also think we were talking the other night about how, I always feel that writers are the canaries in the coal mine. We go to these dangerous places and make sure it's safe for others, but in doing so, we give something to other people by our bravery, where maybe it makes other people feel a bit more brave. And I certainly think that, until Zane and Sky dis- discuss this and open this up, their relationship wasn't really quite as deep as it could have been, because the dead don't go away just because they're dead. They sort of walk alongside us all the time. And anyway, I thought that was really, really powerful. So, Let's see. Oh, here's a question I wanted to know. Sky talks a lot about being a damn good mother. I wanted you to talk about what does that mean for Sky? How does that change? And what does that mean for you? What do you think a
Oh,
damn good mother is?
that's a good question. Boy, I wish I
I'm still figuring that out.
yeah, me too. My children are 32 and 29, and looking back, I think I feel like a good mom. But at the time, I don't. There's a lot of times when I didn't feel like a very good mother. And for Sky, I think she says that a lot because she doesn't really think she's a damn good mother.
Right.
She questions a lot whether she should have left Zane, whether she should have, broken off that relationship, and then she questions about letting him back into their lives 6 years after he left. So it's, the whole issue of being a good mom, I think, is so complex. I think,
Yeah.
and we were talking last night about, how honest are you with your kids? How honest
Yes.
should you be, and at what age should you be honest with them? And that's such a big issue too, particularly when there's secrets involved that involve them.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's a really tough thing because you never know, and because you can't be inside another person and knowing how they perceive this. Which is worse, the things we remember that torment us, or the things that we don't,
Oh my God.
that later come up through, like sometimes they come up through illness, or we get headaches, or what do you think? I mean, I don't know the answer to that question, but that was what I kept thinking about as I was reading your book. Like, what would be worse?
Well, I think, for Zane, it's that he doesn't remember what happened the night of that this mysterious tragedy happened. And so, and I sometimes feel the same way, like something happened in my past that I don't remember. And so, and I feel feelings about it,
Oh,
what it was. And so that has really, fueled a lot of my writing. And I put a lot of that sort of, there's a sort of an emotional terror around it. And there's a longing around it too. And then there's the fear of, well, if you knew what that was, maybe you don't know because you're not supposed to know because something terrible happened. And so that's how Zane feels, is that something terrible happened that either he did or maybe Sky did. And so he first thinks he's protecting her, and then he realizes he's protecting himself. And so he has to tell her what he thinks happened. Um,
would you consider reading something for us?
I would, except that I don't have my book with me.
Oh my God! Oh, I should have told you in advance. Oh, you don't have it memorized. All right.
I have it
Do you
memorized.
remember the first sentence? Do you remember the first sentence?
I actually don't. I mean, it's so funny.
That's really funny.
Once something's published, it's like out of my head. And so it's just like, yeah, I don't even
I
remember.
love that. I love that's really, really funny. Well, let me ask you a few questions about reading. When you're reading things out loud to audiences, do you often feel like, oh, I want to change this word, or I wish I mean, are you always constantly rewriting?
It's like that F. Scott Fitzgerald, famous line where he says novels are never finished, they're only abandoned. And that is so true. Because I
It
could go
is true.
to any page of a book I've written and be like, oh, that word should be taken out, or, um,
It's weird. Yeah, it's really weird. And when you hear it out loud, then the sound of it can feel wrong. It can just feel wrong. So, do you show your pages to others before you send it out to your agent or your editor? Do you have a writers community well, you do have a writers community, obviously, but do you have, like, some people have a reading partner? How does that work for you?
so for me, in my first novel, I sent it to too many people. And
Oh, tell us about that.
I think it can be a real mistake to send your book to people, A, when you only want approval. That is a huge mistake. Yeah. And B, it's a mistake to send it too soon. And C, I think it's a mistake to send it to too many people, and then you think you need to change everything that they
Right.
And that to me happens to me early on. And then if I send it to people later on, I really just want their approval. And so that's not good.
Right.
So
Right.
I work actually I worked on Come As You Are. The first person I worked with was Adrienne Broder, who is an incredible,
She's wonderful.
yeah, she's a wonderful author and a wonderful editor and just an incredible person. And I worked with her on Come As You Are for about, I want to say 3 or 4 years before she went on to be executive director of Aspen Institute and stopped doing editorial work. And that to me was just such a gift to be able to work, one-on-one with a consultant like
Yeah.
that. So that's kind of how I do it. And I've got another editor who I'm working with now on my the book I'm writing now. And so I pretty much just find someone who kind of gets me. But I have to say what really helped, I'm thinking now more about my first novel. And I remember sending pages to you, and I sent pages to a couple of other authors who I really admire. And that was super helpful for me in just choosing authors who I really admired and I wanted to write like them. And so sending pages to people who are a successful published author when you aren't, and having them give you sort of some advice on this is what you should do, I think is very helpful.
It's try Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is tremendously helpful because otherwise you're just sort of working alone and you never really know. But you're right, it's very important to choose the right reader. Um, because if you send a book about a woman who's going through a nasty relationship to someone who's also going through a nasty relationship, that might not be the best book for them to look at with the kind of distance that you need to look at. So how do you deal with the whole publishing process and being a writer, especially now in the pandemic? Has it changed for you?
It has. I mean, I know that this novel, Come As You Are, was supposed to be published right in March when the pandemic broke out, and my publisher was like, "I just can't do it. I can't give you any advance, and I just can't do it. I can't afford it because everything was so in turmoil, and small publishers were going bankrupt, and bookstores were going bankrupt, and
I know it's a terrible time.
terrible." And so I couldn't write for a long time. And that's why Alone Together was such a wonderful gift for me to be able to edit that and pull that together. Um, and so that really changed my view of the whole publishing process, where now with publishing this book, I realize there's very little I can actually do to make it a success. I mean,
Yes,
the
it's
reviews
important.
don't matter. I honestly, to be honest, I got my first terrible review on this book. And it was
That's surprising.
it was such an outlandish review. Like they had the facts wrong, they had the title of my first novel,
Oh,
they had the setting wrong, and I was just like, it was almost like the universe saying to me, you know what, it doesn't matter. And then when I was talking to my publisher about this review, and we were both saying, this is crazy, at that very moment, she got an email saying I was going to get a really great review from another publication. So we just started cracking up because, I mean, it really is, you just can't get attached to anything that happens, positive or negative. And for me, it's just about doing things that I enjoy. Like, talking with you now is a pleasure for me. Will it sell books? I don't know, but
nobody knows. Nobody knows. But that's so interesting what you said because it's so true. I used to take every review to heart early in my career. And then when I married Jeff, who's a music journalist, he would just look at me like I was nuts. And then he'd bring out this music and say, listen to this. And I'd listen to something and say, oh, that's really great. He'd say, terrible reviews. The person hardly gets any gigs, but there's a small section of people who just love this. And he kept doing it and doing it. And I began to realize that he was right. That all a review is one person's opinion. And actually, Ron Charles at the Washington Post told me that all of his readers, they don't even really read the reviews that carefully. They look for the plot. They look to see, is this a book that I'll be interested in? And also, you're right, because reviews that are nasty or weird, readers aren't stupid. They read those reviews and they know, oh, that reviewer has a bone to pick. Something's not quite right there.
Yeah.
But that's exactly the right attitude to be, that who knows why some book becomes number one wherever. And who knows why everybody can probably mention a book that they absolutely love that did not get the acclaim that it deserved. And of course, there's always a story of, Fitzgerald thought he was a failure when he died, and he's still being read everywhere. Van Gogh never sold a painting, or maybe he sold it to his brother. I don't remember. But, you can't, if you go by that, you're going to kill your art. So I want to ask, speaking of art, I always hope and I always fail that I'm going to learn specific craft lessons from a book that I'm writing that I can apply to my next book. And it never works out that way for me. Do you ever have any lessons learned from books that you can apply to the next books that you're writing?
I have the same thing, or actually for me, it's like I'll be reading something and it's like, oh, I'm going to use this in my book and this, and I'll be underlining and I'll be like highlighting. And then I don't use it at all. And so, yeah, but I definitely have learned about having too many characters in a book. Um, and I try each time to have less like points of view. And actually I never do. I always say 5 points of view, which is you're not supposed to do that many points of view because it's really hard. But for me, I don't know, maybe it's like my ADD or whatever, but I can't seem to stick with one person. And
I can't either. I can't either. I love all those points of views.
as a
That
reader,
is so funny. Yeah, as a reader. Would you think, like, subconsciously you learn things from writing, or again, is it still like a total?
I
Yeah.
totally like when I wrote I remember when I wrote the first draft for the first full manuscript for 10,000 Hills, and I thought it was wonderful. And it took me like a year to write. And I thought, oh my God, this is great. And then I sent it out to agents and realized, no, this isn't great. It's actually terrible. And I had it on a computer that I just didn't use for about like 10 years. And when I went back to look at that computer, because I was going to get rid of it finally, I found that manuscript and I was like, oh my God, I'm such a better writer now. And it was so wonderful to feel that way because I think it is subconscious. I don't think it's like I consciously am like thinking about it, but I definitely feel like, yeah, hopefully I'm a better writer now than I was, when I did my.
Yeah, I this is going to lead to a question about who you write for, but this has to do with that kind of stuff. I know that my third novel, I was pressured into writing by a new publisher who wanted me to do something really commercial, and they worked with me on the outline for it, and then said, "Okay, go write it." And my heart was never really in it, but I wrote it, and it came out, and it got exactly 2 reviews, and they were both just the worst reviews you can ever imagine. I mean, I remember it. It was more psychopathology masquerading as fiction from the previously white hot Leavitt, who now has no one else to blame but herself. So of course I cried, I wept, I stayed in my apartment, I didn't come out. I refused to even talk about that book for years and years. And then 2 years ago, I thought, I'm going to look at that book again. And I looked at it, and you know what? It was terrible. That review was absolutely right. And it was terrible because I should not have been writing a book for other people. I should have been writing it for myself, for what I wanted to write and what I needed to figure out. So my question for you is, a lot of my writing students are trying to write to the market, and I always tell them, don't do that. Don't do that. So when you're writing, at what point do you become aware of your audience at all? Or is it always that you're kind of like wading through the shadows, trying to find the answers to the questions you want to know?
Well, I always feel like if there's something that I'm obsessed with, then it's going to be something that some other people will be obsessed with too.
Right,
And
right.
so, yeah, I can remember with my first novel really trying to write to market. And,
Oh,
when you're writing about genocide, that's not really, of my.
it's not really right to market.
And I had editors who wanted at big houses who wanted to buy my book, and it was like, I remember a couple of times I went all the way up to the publisher and they're like, this just isn't marketable. It's genocide, you know? And so I, then luckily when I found my publisher, and the story went out, and I just remember there were like literally over 100 reviews on Goodreads that just said I would never have read about the genocide if it wasn't a book that had like a love
That's
story and, you know, all these other things, family relationships. And I was like, you know, if even if it's only these, you know, whatever amount of people that I got to read about the Rwanda genocide who didn't know anything about it, that to me is really rewarding. And
yeah.
yeah, and so the book I'm writing now, it takes place against the backdrop of Haiti and after the earthquake in 2010, and it's about it's examining altruism. And I know there will be people who won't like it because it kind of looks at like this the vanity shadow of altruism, and you know why different angles of altruism. And so I feel like I can't really think about who's going to be reading this, how will it sell. Otherwise, I wouldn't write it in the same way. I really have to just write it for myself.
That sounds so interesting to me, and it reminds me of the whole bad friend thing that blew up about. Do you know about that? Yeah, it's about, for those of you who don't, it was, you know, one woman had donated her kitty just to a stranger as an act of altruism, and another writer began thinking about it in terms of, well, why are you doing this, and what's the real reason you're talking about it so much? Is it because you want people to think, oh, what a great person you are? And the thing is, I personally, I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's a really interesting question, especially now. Okay, well, I have one last question, and that is, what is obsessing you now, beside the obvious, you know, Ukraine, climate change, the world,
Oh
just
no,
deeply personal things?
so can you repeat that because you froze for a minute and I
Oh, okay,
couldn't.
I'm sorry. I wanted to ask you, besides world politics, climate change, and all that kind of stuff, what is personally obsessing you now?
So definitely altruism. How to be a good person without blasting it on Facebook. How to be a good person and make some sort of change on a daily basis.
How
Um,
do you? How do you?
for me, it's about looking at individuals that I come in contact with, any individuals I come in contact with, whether it's person who's, you know, bagging my groceries or it's someone who's standing outside the grocery store, you know, asking for money. You know, it's all those relationships, or whether it's my husband down the hall who's, you know, working at home and, you know, and irritating me because he's on the phone or whatever. It's all of those things. Yeah, because otherwise, if you just look at, like, I saw a post yesterday on Facebook, someone was like, you know, it's terrible what's happening in the Ukraine, but what can I do about it? And it's like, yeah, there's really not a lot you can do about it, but there are things you can do in your own life, in your own,
Right.
and it's not really about being, you know, for years I wrote about everyday heroes for women's magazines. And it's not really about being a hero. It's about, you know, how can you make someone else's world a little better?
That's a lovely sentiment. I want to thank everybody for being here today. And I want to thank Jennifer so much for talking to me again. What a thrill. I hope we can do it in person one of these days. And I want to remind everybody, Jennifer's book, Come As You Are. You can you find your favorite indie at bookshop.org. Also, Sue Henderson's book, The Flicker of Old Dreams, bookshop.org. And this will be recorded. It is being recorded. It'll be on our YouTube station, so you can watch it and tell your friends. It'll be also